Well, this is a great day to be able to sit and talk about this book that was really in the planning for at least 10 years. And my dear friend who is seated here today, Betty Bob Buckley, they call us the party girls because we kind of pal around together. Neither of us drinks or parties hard, but nonetheless are called the party girls because we like to go to all of the events that are happening. But she kept after me. You really should write a book. Yes, I'm going to, Betty Bob. I have that in my plans. And years would roll on and nothing would be done about the book. And then she's very cagey. And then she started saying things like, Bobbie, you really owe it to your profession. You've been given a rare place in the industry. And then as time went on, Bobbie, really, you're a woman in the profession. You're considered a pioneer. You really ought to write that book. As it's just something you should do for women in the profession. So now I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the book, and I'm thinking, by golly, it finally happened. And Betty Bob can relax now that the book is available. I'm very proud of the book because it accomplishes several things. The history of television in our area. I was given the privilege of being in it from the ground up. I like to say they poured me in with the foundation. And I'm proud of it because as a woman in the profession, I've been able to last all these years and live long enough to make a record of it. And as my friend Eric Clapp over here, who, by the way, is a filmmaker, has his own company, Eric Clapp Films, and came to us and to me as an intern. In what year was it?
94, 5?
94, 5. He was a student at UTA, and his instructions were, we're assigning you to Bobbie Wygant, and please help her clean up that mess that she refers to as her archives. And he did a masterful job of cleaning up the mess and putting much of it on my website, BobbieWygant.com. And it has a number, I haven't counted recently, but many, 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 many of the interviews I have done through the years and other reports. So that's kind of the overview. I'm proud of it that we now have a record and someone can build on it from there. I'm proud also that that I have had the privilege of talking to so many actors and following their careers, starting interviewing them when they were just young actors making the first movie. Among the people like that would be Tom Hanks. When he first started, my first interview with him was for Splash, if any of you remember that movie. And then it went from there. John Travolta was another one who was barely known from television, and widely known from television, but before that, barely known in the industry. And so we have, a kind of life story of some of these people. And then just something that's enjoyable to read. This is a book you can pick up and read it for 30 minutes, an hour, however much time you have, and then put it down and go back to it maybe a few hours later or the next day and pick it up and just start enjoying where you left off, or maybe flipping through and finding something else you want to read. So you can hopscotch through it, you can sit down and read it cover to cover, whatever. So, and I am very proud of the association with TCU Press. It came about kind of as an accident, because Christina Petoskey, with whom I've been associated for many, many years. She was edited many of my pieces when she was at it was then WBAP TV. And we have kept a friendship through all these years and have worked together. She would edit specials that I did, like my Academy Awards specials. And so Christina happened to be someplace and ran into this woman that she thought she knew from someplace, and they began to realize, oh yes, they had known one another at Arlington Heights High School. So that as they got reacquainted, Christina found out that this woman, whose name was Kathy Walton, was working for TCU Press. And Christina said, well, what do you do there? And she said, I'm the editor. And Christina said, oh, really? And of course, Christina had been on Betty Bob's team to, push Bobbie into starting this book. But, she's not getting any younger. And so anyway, before they parted at that first meeting, they had arranged a meeting for me to meet Kathy Walton and the other members of the staff of TCU Press. And so we met. Christina said, now, Bobbie, there's no obligation here. We're just going to see what they have to say, and they're going to kind of sound us out on what kind of a book we might write. Up to that point, not word one had been written. I knew nothing of the publishing business. Christina did know the publishing business, having published 2 books of her own, and her brother is Joe Nick Petoskey, who's written a number of books, and she worked with him on some of those books. So she knew the publishing business. I knew from zilch. I know television, that's what I know. And so we go to the meeting, and we're sitting around kind of like this, tables, and they start looking through. Christina brought about 100 pictures that day, and they're looking at the picture, wow, and oh my goodness, look at this, and I'm passing around the pictures and getting very excited, and then we went from that discussion to, well, now we could this, and then it went to the discussion of we'll do, this is what we'll do, and before we left, Dan, meanwhile, was going back and forth to his own office, taking care of his business. And finally, as we were trying to wind up the 2-hour meeting, Dan then said, in a few very well chosen words, he said, this will make a very good book for us because it has lots of photographs, and photographs really do appeal to today's readers. So we leave, we're in the car ready to come back. I said, Christina, what is this thing about we're just going to go and meet these people and see what their ideas are? I said, we've done everything but sign a contract. and anyway, it was a very happy meeting, and we all felt good about it. And I felt like, yes, I want TCU Press to be the publishers. And I am beyond delighted with the way this book has turned out, Dan. It's a beautiful book. I'm proud of it to show anybody. If there are any glitches in it, it's my fault, not their fault. I will take all responsibility for omissions, commissions, or whatever. And I'm sure I think the comment we will probably get from people and from critics is what we've left out. as you can see, if we put 70 years in there, you would need a U-Haul to get the darn book out of the bookstore. So that's kind of the background to the book. I was interested in, Dan, in your introduction because you said I interviewed every celebrity who came through town. And when we say town, we mean Dallas and Fort Worth. We cover always both cities. And there was one person, not only that I didn't do, that I turned down. Mm-hmm. And everybody said, "You turned down Elizabeth Taylor?" I said, well, she didn't give me any choice but to turn it down. She came through town through Dallas, promoting a perfume. And so they called me and said, there would be a press conference and I would come, they said, and you will come at such and such a time, at such and such a place. And I said, excuse me, I don't do press conferences, but if I could have just 4 minutes or 5 minutes with Miss Taylor, and we can do it in her dressing room, or we'll make it wherever she wants for her comfort, et cetera, et cetera. I said, but I have to talk with her alone. Oh, they said, no, impossible. And I said, well, then I won't be able to do anything. I won't come. And this PR woman looked at me. She was so indignant, and she said, "You mean to tell me that you are going to turn down an opportunity to be with Elizabeth Taylor where you could ask a question?" I said, "Ma'am, I don't do press conferences." And I said, "But thank you very much for your call." So I missed that one, Dan. I'm sorry. I missed it.
She missed it.
I always like to find out what you're thinking about the book. And so if anybody has a question, just speak up. Raise your hand, speak up.
Any questions for Bobbie?
Yes, sir.
I have one. Of all the many, many different celebrities and stars you've met over the years, is there one in particular you were starstruck when you first met them?
I have to admit that the person I got very excited about, and this was very early in the Dateline, when I started doing Dateline in the fall of 1960. And a very short time after I started that program, I got a call from a gentleman who said he represented Bob Hope and was inviting me to come to SMU at a certain time and get a one-on-one interview with Bob Hope. And I was really excited because I was a Bob Hope fan, radio, his movies. I remember one time my brother told my mother, said, "I am not going with her anymore to the movies because she embarrasses me." And my mother said, "What do you mean?" And we had gone to see a road movie. And he said, "She just laughs all the time, and she just laughs so loud, and I'm not going to the movies with her anymore." So I was a Bob Hope fan from the word go. And I really was excited about getting to meet and talk with Bob Hope. And Bob could just put you at ease, just with hello. And we did the interview at SMU. It was during a break, the rehearsal that he had for a show that was coming up that night. And we sat on the edge of the stage with our legs hanging over the edge of the stage. And he and my husband, Phil, was promotion director of the station. So, and Bob being an NBC star representing the station and NBC, he was there kind of, making do with what PR people do and promotion people do. And so Bob had met Phil. And then when we started the interview, he says, "Now your name is Bobbie." And then he didn't know he started to say the last name, and then he kind of stopped, and I said, it's Wygant. I said, W-Y-G-A-N-T, and he said, yes. He said, well, I just didn't know if you had another name, a stage name. I said, Bob, it's my married name. And I said, it has to be my real name and my stage name. And I said, I wouldn't think of changing it. And he said, well, look, honey, he says, if I can make it with this nose, you can make it with that name. So, but Bob came to this area frequently, and every time he would come, either he would call or his people would call and say, Bob's coming through, he'd like to do an interview if you want to, always if you want to. Who doesn't want to interview Bob? Hope they have a chance. So at one point Bob said to me, Bobbie, you have enough stuff on me to do a 52-week series. But always, every interview, his interviews didn't require much editing because he just would speak succinctly. Always, if it was a serious thing, he'd give it to you in a serious vein. But he was a comedian, so he was always, working toward a punchline. So his interviews were always great fun. That, to answer your question, Bob.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Everybody in this room is smiling. You're just so charming, everybody's. And I noticed in the interview that I watched with Bradley Cooper, he was so charmed by you too. How did you know that you were drawn to broadcasting? What was your first hint that this was going to be your career?
The book has it in more detail, and I hope you enjoy reading that part of it. But in my hometown of Lafayette, Indiana, Purdue University is located across the river in West Lafayette, Indiana. And Purdue had its own radio station going back to 1922. It was the oldest radio station in the state of Indiana. And I listened to that station, and I was aware that they had girl, as we called them then, girl announcers as well as boy announcers. And Purdue had a student staff and a professional paid staff. And so I listened. There was one woman who was from Lafayette. Her name was Becky Ann Purvine, and I would listen to Becky Ann Purvine. I had thought at one time when I was younger I wanted to be a doctor. And I met several times with a woman doctor in Lafayette and talked with her about, various and sundry things, and about having a family life and being a doctor. I remember we talked about that one time. And then I began to realize, my mother died when I was 16, and I began to realize that maybe a medical career was not for me. And I was always at school, I was always very good at standing before the class and talking, and as you can see, talking is not a problem for me. Shutting up is my problem. Anyway, I just thought, they have girl announcers, maybe I could do that. And I began to get more and more interested. My grandfather was very well known in the communities. He was the man who ran the post office, and he ran the post office. And I was very close to my granddad. And he knew one of the deans at Purdue and took me over there when I was in my senior year of high school. And the dean said, absolutely, he said, oh, wonderful grades, this is the kind of student we like to have, and he just, and it turned out he would be the dean of the curriculum that I wanted to follow. So that's how I got into broadcasting.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
You loved Bob Hope as someone that became your friend and frequent guest that you interviewed. Was there anybody that was a stinker?
Was there anybody
That was a stinker.
a stinker?
Yeah, somebody that wasn't as easy to get along with that you still had to interview.
Gary Busey was a thorn in my side.
I think everybody says that.
We had a little dust up one time when I asked him a question, and the question was something that I wanted to know about him, and I said, what was it this or was it that? And it had to do with where he was born. I said, were you born in Oklahoma or were you born in Texas? And he said, well, if you had read your bio, you would know. And he was getting all kind of huffy with me. And I did this, I actually came out of the chair kind of like that. And I said, excuse me, it's not in the bio, okay? And the room got very quiet. I mean, the camera guy is very quiet. The studio representative was almost shaking because they were afraid he would get up and walk. But it kind of settled him down. I raised my voice and, got his attention. And he finally then did answer the question. But I don't know. I felt kind of sorry for him. This is what happened when big fame and big recognition comes to someone who isn't ready for it and doesn't know how to handle it. And when he won an Academy Award, first movie out practically, he just never got over it. He just, no matter what he did after that, it didn't bring him the fame and the recognition that he thought he deserved. And so I kind of felt sorry for him in that respect, but he was his own worst enemy as far as I was concerned.
You had such a distinctive verbal sign-off from the Dateline show, as I recall.
You mean when I was doing Dateline?
Yeah.
And when it was time to
But
sign
I just
it
thought
off?
when we're done, could you sign off?
This got to be a trademark, and I really was so totally unaware. But I would, they would count me down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'd say, that's all for today, but do join us again tomorrow, and thank you, bye-bye. And I would kind of, do it like that. And, it happened not too long ago. I was in the supermarket, and I'm busy, taking care of business, and somebody pushed a cart by me, and as she went by, she said, bye-bye. Well, thank goodness it wasn't something obscene. I'd hate to be going through my life, people yelling obscenities. Anybody? Yes.
Well, I was looking at your book, and I have to admit, I didn't know anything about you except what I'd seen on TV. Of course, I'd seen you for many years on TV since I was a boy, and I was really happy to see all of the pictures of you as a child and a teenager and your wedding pictures, and saw how you looked back then and everything. I thought that was great. And I also liked all of the information about the early development of television in this area and WBAP and how that all came about. And I think they started the radio station with $300. I think that was it. I thought that was amazing that they could do something like that for $300. So I really enjoyed that aspect of your book. And I also like the introduction by Bob Schieffer and the connection between his future wife and you. That was surprising and interesting too. And I like Bob Schieffer. He's a great guy. And I also liked, I was surprised in the book. I was looking at all your interviews, and I couldn't believe that you were interviewing Sonny Barger, the leader of the Hells Angels. How did that come about?
Yes, I remember when I was also the producer of that Dateline show, and when I booked that, they said, do you even know who he is? I said, I'm very aware. But there was some, I've forgotten now exactly what it was, but there was some kind of philanthropic, believe it or not, philanthropic thing attached to that interview. And but I remember one time my husband and I were in San Francisco, and we went across to what is the county across the bay there. Anyway, we were there, and I don't know, somehow we came out, and there were a couple of motorcycles there, and one was really glitzy, like something I hadn't seen before. And the guy standing there, so I just said to him, "What in the world is this?" And so I noticed that my husband was kind of pulling me up. And when we got at a safe distance, my husband said, "You just talked to everybody. That guy's one of the Hell's Angels." But, but anyway, they permitted me to have that, and it was fine. It was fine. But now, do I recommend the Hell's Angels? No. I'm a reporter. You talk to everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, Bob.
Any recollections of Bruce Willis?
Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis he's something else. After we'd had a couple of interviews, Bruce started just, needling me in interviews. And the ultimate needle was for Armageddon, doing the interview, and at that particular time, everything you picked up, paper, newspaper, magazine, whatever, had a story about Bruce Willis and being a hands-on father to his 3 daughters, who were teenagers. And so I started the interview by saying, "Well, Bruce, everything I pick up these days, picture you, story of you about being a hands-on father with your daughters." This was right before he and Demi announced they were separating. And he said, "Yeah, I know, Bobbie." He said, "It's just not like the old days when you used to come up to the canyon, we'd dance naked all night." That was some other Bobbie. And then you just couldn't get the better side of him. Anyway, he just kept that routine going about us dancing naked. And so finally I said, the room producer indicated that I'd used up my time. And I said, "Okay, Bruce." I said, "You've goofed around now, and you've used all my time, and now I have nothing to put on the air. I can't put this rubbish on the air." And so he turned to the room producer and he said, "Turn off the clock. I'll decide when she leaves." So he went, "All right, now just ask me anything you'd like." So we finally did get something that I could put on the air. I went from there to the next area to interview the director. And while we're setting up and the director's getting mic'd and everything, here comes Bruce running through the door. And just as they said, "Bobbie, you're on," they started rolling. Bruce comes to the side of the chair of the director, and he takes his microphone from him, and he says, "Hey," he says, "Bobbie used to come up to the canyon." If Bruce were to walk in here right now, he would probably find some little needling thing to say to him.
Well, was he a good dancer?
One for you, Bob. Okay. Yes, Diane.
Bobbie, a long time ago you told me that you interviewed a young Steven Spielberg. I just wanted to know, what was that like?
I met Steven Spielberg before he was even before he was Steven Spielberg, and it was at a thing it wasn't really a press event. It was the studio was having some kind of they were announcing a slate of projects is what they were doing. And I was invited, and they said, no interviews, just come. So I'm sitting there, and one of the vice presidents comes up, and he says, I'm going to bring a fellow, I'm just going to pull a chair up, and he can sit next to you, and just talk to him. He said, you know, anything, doesn't matter. And so presently, he brings a chair, and this little guy sits down. He's a little fuzzy-faced guy, you know, looks like a teenager. And I asked him his name, he told me, and I said, well, what do you do? And he said, I said, are you with the studio? And he said, yes. He said, I'm doing some TV things. And I said, what are you doing? He said, directing. I said, oh, yeah, all right. And we chatted, and I said, how long have you been making films? And he said, I started filming things when I was about 8 years old. And I said, well, what kind of a camera did you have? And he said he had a 16 millimeter camera. And I thought, oh, the kid comes from money, you know. He's got a 16 millimeter camera when he's eight years old. And so then in my head, I'm thinking, I have to remember this guy. And I said, and what is your name again? He said, Steven Spielberg. And that was my first meeting with Steven Spielberg. And I had interviewed him many times. And when I look at him now on television, and he's, you know, gray hair and the gray beard and everything, and then I think about, you had a different kind of fuzzy face the first time. But I'm a big Spielberg fan. I think he is a really extraordinary filmmaker. Schindler's List, I don't think I've ever had any movie physical emotion to a movie as much as Schindler's List. And you know, we saw it at a screening that included the press and other people. It was a mixed audience, in other words. And usually the press, it's my creed, I sit through every credit. I don't care where I am, I sit through every credit to honor everybody who worked on that film. And sometimes it would drive them crazy when it would be just a press screening, because the press would get up and be, you know, on the way to the bar. But I would be the last one out of the theater. And that's just part of my religion. And so that particular screening is a huge theater in New York. Nobody got up and walked out immediately. I mean, it was as if we were all just glued to our chair. And then many people did stay to the end of the credits and then got up and left. And everybody walked out, most people just not saying anything or saying, oh my gosh, what a movie. So I'm a big Spielberg fan.
A little side note, if I can interject to the Spielberg thing, is when we were working on the 50th anniversary, I think, of the station or a package or something, and we were going to give a special shout out to Bobbie at this big event, gala, and we were thinking, oh, who could we call that would have time to say something on camera? And like, well, let's hit, you know, we're talking about hitting the big ones first, and so we actually called Spielberg while they were making Saving Private Ryan. And we're like, there's no way he's going to stop filming to wish Bobbie a happy message or whatever. And sure enough, he's like, yep, I'll do it when you want me to do it.
Wow. Wow.
And Matt Damon did too.
Yeah.
I brought him up from a pup. Yes.
You had done the Jerry Lewis Labor Day Telethon, hadn't you? Did you want to say anything about that, and how you got involved with it?
Harold Taft and I were the first local MCs of the Jerry Lewis Telethon. And I did it for 16 years. And then they brought in by the end of my 16th year, I think we had about 6 MCs, so I didn't feel like I was deserting the ship. But I just said, enough is enough. You don't need 6 MCs, and so I'm going to gracefully bow out. And they didn't. No. We need us. No, 16 is it. And Harold Taft also was bowing out too, I think. But if not that time, shortly after that, Harold Taft. I love it. Anytime I make a presentation or a lecture and open it up, people will talk about Harold Taft. And we were good friends. We were the old timers. In the very beginning, he and I shared an office until he got his weather department set up properly. And Harold was, all seriousness when it was time to do the weather. But he had a really wicked sense of humor sometimes. And he would only share it with people he trusted. But his favorite thing, I would frequently work late into the night and sometimes even after midnight. And after he got all the weather programs out of the way, he would come and stand in my doorway. And the reason he didn't come in was that he needed to keep an ear out for the phone down the hall where his office was. And he'd stand in the doorway and he would tell me what was going on, the scuttlebutt around the station. And he always kind of was in fisticuffs with management over something or other. And he'd say, "Do you know what the suits want to do now?" and he would tell me what he perceived to be some outrageous thing, that the suits that was management upstairs. They were the suits. But Harold was I've never known anybody so completely professional as Harold Taft was to his profession. I mean, you couldn't buy him. There is no way you could buy him. I mean, he was not for sale to anybody. When we had a change of ownership and the new people came in, and Harold was a private company, and he was not paid by Carter Publications or WBAP. They paid his company. And so the new owners said, "We can't have a private company, we're out to destroy that." And so they would call meetings with Harold, and he wouldn't answer the memo, and he wouldn't show up at the meeting. He just wouldn't go. And so they finally found a way to live with Harold, but he was his own. He was a colonel, and so sometimes the staff would call him, Colonel Taft, and not degrading him, but they honoring him. What does Colonel Taft say about that? It was done with respect.
One of the early things in my career, when we would be doing a slideshow or something in early my photo career, and we were like last minute everything, we would run our film out to Channel 5 and they would run it for us because they still had the lab, because prior to video, everything they shot on those cameras, I guess you'd wind up like the 16s.
Yes.
The lab was right there. So
yes.
When you had your early shows, were your editors doing it on film?
The things that we would go out and film, they would bring back and put in the lab, and then it had to be edited. Even if we didn't edit content a lot, it still had to be prepared to be projected through the system. And yes, I don't remember the exact years. Well, it was over a period of time. It wasn't just today we're film and tomorrow we're were tape. It wasn't. It was a kind of gradual layer on layer of making that transition from film to tape.
That lab saved our bacon many times.
Yeah.
We were under a deadline.
Yeah.